I never guessed that a calm weekend hike could pull back the curtain on feelings I had always pretended did not exist. But that is precisely what happened when Ryan and I wandered off the marked trail in those thick, silent woods. The tension in the air felt more tangible than the branches whipping at our arms, reminding me that small choices can unravel a lifetime of easy assumptions. We set off anticipating fresh air, shared jokes, and endless greenery. Yet each step led us deeper into uncharted territory, both in the wilderness and in our friendship. Ryan and I had been best friends since sophomore year of high school, bonding over silly pranks, last-minute homework sessions, and an unspoken devotion to each other's well-being that never required labeling or explanation. We carried that casual closeness into college, believing our bond to be unshakable and our mutual understanding to be absolute. But neither of us imagined that a few wrong turns in the forest could reveal cracks in our facade of simple friendship. We first realized something was off when Ryan's phone lost signal. Then mine followed suit, leaving us stranded with only a worn map and our own misplaced confidence to guide us. I wanted to tease him for leading us astray, but the tightening coil in my chest stopped me from joking, because I sensed our predicament was more serious than a quick fix. When the daylight began slipping through the tall pines, leaving us with pockets of gloom instead of warm sunshine, we exchanged uneasy glances that confirmed we might have ventured too far. I tried to shrug off the knot in my stomach, insisting that we had enough supplies and that neither of us would panic. But I still caught a new edge in Ryan's voice whenever he reassured me we could find our way back. The wind rose through the canopy, rustling leaves with a hiss that felt like a warning, prompting us to find shelter near a natural alcove nestled at the base of a moss-covered boulder. As we worked together to stretch our small tarp overhead, I became more aware of the light brush of his arms against mine and the subtle interplay of tension whenever our eyes met, a charged undercurrent neither of us wanted to name. Night fell fast, and with it came an unsettling awareness of how alone we were in this place, with no phone service or helpful park rangers to rescue us. Ryan handed me a granola bar in an almost protective gesture, and our fingers met, sending a flicker of warmth through my chest that I tried to ignore by focusing on the sound of distant thunder. We crouched beneath the tarp, huddling close enough that I could count the tiny freckles across his cheekbones whenever lightning illuminated his face, and I found myself swallowing nerves that had nothing to do with being lost. In the dim light, every breath felt synchronized, every small shift emphasizing a closeness that I had never truly acknowledged, and as the drizzle turned into a steady rain, I realized this was more than just a wandering hike. It was a confrontation with truths I had buried under years of friendship. Morning arrived with a persistent drizzle tapping on our makeshift shelter, and I woke to find my head resting against Ryan's shoulder, as though seeking comfort in his warmth during the restless night. We exchanged a quick, self-conscious glance, neither of us quite ready to speak about the closeness we had stumbled into, preferring to act as if it were only the result of exhaustion. Once the rain subsided, we hauled ourselves out from under the sagging tarp, taking stock of our meager supplies and the muddy clearing surrounding us, silently deciding we should move on rather than linger where the memory of that charged silence still echoed in the cool morning air. Neither of us spoke for several minutes, our footsteps squelching across sodden soil, but the quiet only highlighted the lingering tension that made my heart flutter each time I glanced in Ryan's direction. It felt as though the forest itself was observing us, the towering pines and dripping moss attuned to the fragile undercurrent of emotions we tried to hide with every polite nod or quick half-smile. When Ryan gestured at a faint trail winding deeper into the trees, I nodded, silently grateful to have a direction, however uncertain, that might distract me from the jolt of electricity running along my nerves whenever he brushed past me. Yet, even as we pressed forward, each step turned our solitude into an insistent reminder that we were alone, left to rely on each other in a way that magnified whatever had begun stirring between us. By midday, the rain clouds thinned, revealing pale shafts of sunlight piercing the canopy above, which did little to ease the damp chill seeping through our clothes. We paused by a shallow stream to wash the mud off our hands, and I caught myself staring at Ryan's reflection when he knelt to fill his water bottle, noticing how the tension had rearranged his usually relaxed features. He must have sensed my gaze because he looked up with a fleeting, uncertain smile, prompting my heart to skip a beat as I fumbled to act casual, scooping water over my face to hide the sudden rush of warmth creeping along my cheeks. With a soft sigh, he extended his hand, helping me stand on the slippery stones, and our fingers lingered just a moment longer than necessary, forging another unspoken promise I wasn't prepared to name. We forged ahead, winding among rocks slick with moss, until a sharp incline brought us to a vantage point overlooking the dense forest canopy, where we strained to spot any sign of a real path. Instead, we found only endless green rolling into the distance, reminding us how lost we truly were. Ryan glanced my way with an apologetic shrug, words forming on his lips that he seemed unable to voice, as though admitting his fear might unravel the fragile optimism that kept us moving. Determined to push through the growing unease, I suggested we descend carefully on the far side of the slope, convinced there had to be some recognizable landmark or an easier route home. Hey, thanks for watching until this point. Please leave a comment if you're enjoying the video. It really helps us grow the channel and reach more people. And hey, thank you very much. Let's get back to story. Yet my legs shook with each careful step downward, not entirely from exhaustion. By late afternoon, clouds gathered again, and we decided to set up a smaller camp beneath a cluster of evergreen branches, layering our tarp at an angle to catch the water that threatened to fall. While Ryan built a modest fire, I gathered fallen branches and tried not to focus on how my pulse fluttered whenever he ran a hand through his hair or gave me that faint, grateful look in thanks. Eventually, flames crackled in the damp air, offering a reprieve from the creeping chill, and we settled on opposite sides of the campfire, neither eager to discuss the tension that linked our movements like a fragile thread. At one point, Ryan reached for my foot, muttering something about how I needed to dry my socks, his fingers lightly brushing my ankle before pulling away in a flustered rush that mirrored exactly what I felt inside. The sun dipped low, and the forest turned dusky around us, shadows thickening until it felt like we existed in a bubble of light cast by the dancing fire. I tried to muster conversation about our plan for the next day, but the questions in my head drowned out any practical thoughts. Ryan, equally preoccupied, tossed small twigs into the flames, his jaw set in a tight line that belied the confident facade he usually wore. Something was shifting between us, a weighty possibility we had never acknowledged, and as the campfire popped and hissed, I realized we were quickly approaching a point where we could no longer pretend nothing had changed. The wilderness might have stolen our sense of direction, but it also stripped away our excuses, leaving me more aware than ever that some secrets cannot remain buried forever. The forest settled into an uneasy hush that evening, as if every creature had sensed how close we were to crossing a line we had never acknowledged before, and by the time darkness fully engulfed the trees, our small campfire had died to embers that glowed faintly against the damp air. Ryan and I crawled into the tent we had hastily pitched beneath a towering evergreen, feeling the tension coil in the narrow space that allowed only a few inches between our sleeping bags. At first, we clung to practical comments, remarking on the need to dry our socks or wishing the drizzle would fade, but every word quivered with an awareness neither of us could hide any longer. My pulse hammered in my ears, reminding me how we were alone in a silent wilderness, guided only by flickers of moonlight against the tent's thin fabric and the faint drumming of our uncertain hearts. We lay side by side, blinking at the shadows above us, until Ryan rolled onto his elbow, his eyes reflecting the hesitant glow of my flashlight. His voice, low and breathy, broke the quiet when he asked if I was really okay. The question weighted with concern yet wrapped in layers of feeling that made my stomach tighten in response. I managed a nod and tried to speak, but my throat felt constricted, leaving me unable to disguise the tremor in my answer when I finally admitted how scared I was. Afraid not only of being lost but also of how my view of him had shifted in ways that thrilled and terrified me. My words triggered a flicker of relief on his face. As though he'd been waiting for a sign, I felt the same massive shift he did. His hand found mine between the sleeping bags, our fingers weaving together, and I felt a spark buzz across every nerve in my body, igniting a warmth that had nothing to do with body heat. I could barely breathe as he propped himself up, the soft rustle of the tent floor magnifying every move. When his free hand gently brushed a strand of hair from my forehead, I realized no joking excuse could hide how desperately I wanted him closer. His touch shifted from tentative to purposeful, sliding along my neck in a slow caress that made me bite back a shudder of delight. I braced for a fleeting, timid brush of lips, but instead, he leaned in with an urgency I never expected, and our mouths met in a kiss that stole the breath from my lungs and sent my heart careening out of control. We started with careful pecks, then pressed into something bolder, exploring that threshold between friendship and raw desire, letting our hands roam under damp shirts to discover the sensation of skin against skin. Light rain tapped on the tent, blending with the sharp catch of our breathing, and the heady warmth of shared excitement made the world outside feel impossibly distant. Ryan whispered that he had thought about this possibility many times, yet never had the courage to speak it aloud, and hearing that confession loosened something inside me, encouraging me to admit I felt the same. We eased closer, tasting each other's breath with lingering kisses, until the gentle friction of our bodies melted away all doubts about whether this step was right or wrong. His hand slipped along my waist, urging me nearer, and I found my own fingers slipping beneath the waistband of his shirt, feeling the firm planes of his back that seemed to quiver with each soft stroke. Despite our inexperience, there was an underlying certainty in the way we tested these new boundaries, a mutual agreement that we would only go as far as felt safe for both of us. We spoke in hushed whispers about how we wanted to navigate this physical yearning, acknowledging that sex was on our minds but that we should let things unfold naturally, without forcing a moment that might become overwhelming. I felt the heat of his body mingling with mine, and though every fiber of my being cried out for more, we allowed ourselves a calmer rhythm, sharing careful caresses and tender kisses that deepened the closeness without crossing a line we weren't fully ready to handle. Eventually, our frantic breathing mellowed into gentle smiles and lazy, affectionate touches, and we settled on our sides, foreheads nearly touching in the shadows. I tried to process how, in a single night, we could transform from lost hikers stumbling through damp woods into two people bound by a profound and unexpected intimacy that felt both brand new and strangely natural. He brushed his lips across my cheek in a feather-light gesture before resting his head against my shoulder, and in that moment, I understood we had shattered the old framework of our relationship forever. Outside, the rain fell softly, and inside, our bodies radiated a contented warmth, leaving me with the dizzying certainty that no matter what happened next, we had taken a leap that neither of us regretted. Morning light filtered through the thin tent fabric, creating pale shapes that danced across Ryan's sleeping face, and my heart squeezed at the memory of his warmth pressed so close during the night. Reality came flooding back the instant I blinked awake, recalling how we had crossed that invisible line between us and exchanged whispered confessions in the protective darkness. The forest still loomed beyond our shelter, reminding me that we were not safely home yet. Yet the uncertainty of our surroundings no longer felt as daunting as the vulnerability I now carried in my chest. Sliding carefully out of the tangle of sleeping bags, I tried to regain my composure, unsure if daylight would cool the electricity we had unleashed or transform it into something lasting. Ryan stirred at the rustle of nylon, stretching with a wince at the stiffness of another night spent on uneven ground, and I offered him a smile that felt both shy and relieved. We exchanged a few muffled words about the storm that had finally passed, deliberately avoiding any direct mention of how I had fallen asleep against his heartbeat, or how his hand had lingered along my waist in a way that felt more than friendly. A knot of lingering tension twisted in my stomach, blending excitement with the fear that maybe we had jumped too quickly into unfamiliar territory. But one look at his gentle expression told me he felt the same conflicting rush of hope and anxiety. We stepped outside together, breathing in the crisp morning air, which felt clearer than before, as if the forest had decided to grant us a reprieve after our night of raw confessions. The ground was soaked, droplets clinging to each leaf, and we took turns shaking out our shoes before packing up the damp tarp and scanning the horizon for any sign of a trail. Although we had not yet spoken about our new intimacy in broad daylight, our every movement was accompanied by a heightened awareness, as though the rest of the world had narrowed to the single point where my shoulder brushed his. Occasionally, his gaze would flick to me, a slight flush creeping over his cheeks, and I knew that the line between us had shifted in a way we could never truly undo. After gathering our things, we pressed onward through the undergrowth, spotting a gentle slope that might lead us to higher ground for a better view. Our silence stayed thick with the weight of questions we couldn't yet articulate. Did last night mean our friendship was changed forever? Or was there a possibility of stepping backward into a safer dynamic that lacked the fearful thrill of desire? Each time I tried to force the words, my pulse throbbed in my ears, and I worried that voicing my insecurities might shatter the fragile harmony we were balancing on. When Ryan eventually broke the silence, it was only to remark on the slight shift in terrain, pointing out a faint path that might have been made by roaming deer, prompting us to follow it with guarded optimism. By midday, the sky cleared enough for a few sunbeams to pierce the canopy, offering enough warmth to dry some of our soaked gear. We found a small clearing near a babbling stream, where we spread out the tarp on rocks glistening with leftover rain, and shared a modest meal of protein bars, mindful of our dwindling supply. As we ate, Ryan locked eyes with me, his knuckles grazing mine in a gesture so subtle that anyone else would have missed it. But for me, it carried the memory of his slow, tender touch in the tent. My heart pounded, and I found myself fumbling for conversation, managing only a quiet question about how he felt, relief coursing through me when he answered with a shy smile and a murmured admission that he had no regrets. For a few minutes, we dared to talk about it openly, hushed voices blending with the steady trickle of the stream. I confessed my nerves about how quickly the closeness had escalated, and he acknowledged that, while it frightened him too, it also felt like a natural step, something that had always been there under the surface, waiting for the right moment to bloom. We agreed there was no neat label that fit us perfectly yet, and that we should be careful not to rush into a full physical relationship without the clarity and security we would need once we returned to everyday life. Yet, the longing in his eyes told me that caution did not erase the swell of desire we had awakened, and the mere mention of last night's closeness made me shiver with a mingled sense of excitement and trepidation. Rejuvenated by the sun's rays and our brief confession, we hoisted our backpacks again and continued onward, following a winding trail that curved around a boulder-strewn hillside. My mind flicked between scanning the route ahead for signs of civilization and recalling the press of Ryan's body against mine, how our mouths had fit together with unexpected ease, sparking a need that had burned away lingering doubts. Each brush of his arm against mine reignited that warmth, reminding me that our bond no longer hinged solely on shared history, but also on the secret hours we had spent forging a new kind of trust in the darkness of the tent. Evening approached once more, but this time we felt more prepared, our footsteps steadier and our determination bolstered by the knowledge we could rely on each other. We found a decent spot to settle for the night, this one less soaked by the previous rainfall, allowing us to build a small, crackling fire that cast a comforting glow across our modest camp. Ryan and I exchanged only a few words while unpacking, both of us wrestling with the realization that another night in the tent awaited, along with the possibility that unspoken boundaries might be tested further. The tension simmered beneath our practical tasks, fueling a sense that we had reached a turning point, unable to simply deny the connection we had tasted the night before. Darkness wrapped the forest in layers of quiet, leaving only the gentle crackle of flames and the murmur of distant nocturnal creatures as we stood side by side. Before either of us could overthink it, Ryan placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice a soft invitation to rest, so we could face tomorrow's challenges with clear heads. My chest tightened at the memory of his warmth from the previous night, but I nodded, understanding we still needed the closeness his presence provided. I crawled into the tent ahead of him, the soft rustle of nylon stirring my fluttering nerves, and although we didn't speak, I felt the energy between us blaze anew as soon as he joined me inside. The hush that fell as we settled into our sleeping bags carried an unspoken promise. No matter how lost we still were in the wilderness or in our own shifting emotions, we would confront both mysteries together, drawn forward by the fragile bond we had so unexpectedly discovered. Dawn broke with a startling clarity that illuminated every branch and leaf, revealing a trail of sunlit mist drifting through the tall trees, and for the first time, I dared to hope we might find our way out before another restless night fell upon us. Ryan stirred beside me, his hair still tousled from sleep, and the look we exchanged carried reminders of the stolen touches in the darkness. as well as a mutual curiosity about how our tentative bond might change once we returned to everyday life. We packed up camp in subdued cooperation, brushing away leaves and dirt from the half-dried tarp, each slight contact between us triggering a pulse that made my skin tingle with the memory of his breath against my neck. My heart wavered between a fluttery excitement and an undeniable worry that, once we walked out of the forest, the intimacy we had discovered might slip from our fingers. We decided to skirt the base of a rocky ridge that loomed beyond our makeshift campsite, figuring that elevation might give us the vantage point we needed to spot any sign of a known trail or, better yet, a park boundary. Ryan forged ahead, calling back words of encouragement whenever I hesitated on loose stones. And though the slope was less steep than the ravine from the other day, my nerves jangled with each unsteady foothold. He glanced over his shoulder at one point, offering a hand I gratefully accepted, and the look he gave me brimmed with reassurance, silently reminding me that we would tackle this path together. The ache in my calves and the dryness in my throat seemed like a small price to pay for the tenderness that flickered between us, a shared determination that fueled our progress. By midday, we reached a flat, open expanse near the top of the ridge, where a warm sun streamed over our shoulders, chasing away the lingering chill from past rains. We paused to drink from our canteens, resting on a broad, mossy rock, and the relative silence allowed our thoughts to swirl in the open air. Ryan turned to me, voice cracking slightly as he mentioned how surreal it felt to be lost yet closer than ever, describing it as some strange blessing hidden within an otherwise harrowing experience. My chest tightened with the realization that I had been wondering the same thing, trying to decide if this tangled journey was precisely what we needed to finally confront the feelings we had smothered beneath years of pretending. I drew a slow breath and confessed I didn't want to lose the closeness we had built, even when we returned to normal life, uncertain as I was about how people would react. Ryan's response was immediate and earnest, his brow furrowed in quiet determination as he insisted we handle everything step by step, refusing to let fear eclipse the bond we had begun cultivating. He admitted that he shared my worries about friends and family, about how labels might complicate a connection that felt so personal and alive. Yet, his grip on my hand tightened, and in that gesture, I sensed a conviction that we could figure it out. The vulnerability in his gaze matched the pounding of my pulse, both of us aware of how fragile our new understanding was, yet feeling hopeful enough to trust that honesty would guide us through the uncertain days ahead. Gathering our courage, we pressed onward, descending the opposite slope of the ridge until the thick canopy swallowed us once more. The sunbeams reduced to a soft glow speckling the ground. Each rustle of undergrowth and flutter of birds overhead snapped my focus between the terrain and the nearness of Ryan, whose shoulder now bumped mine at intervals that struck me as deliberately frequent. With each step, I reflected on the difference between innocent brushes from our old friendship and this new, charged awareness. Every slight nudge or shared glance humming with a possibility that made my stomach twist in anticipation. The swirl of tall ferns and mossy logs added a dreamy quality to our hike, as if the forest itself bore witness to the delicate bond unfolding between us. Late afternoon brought a moment of relief when we spotted what looked like a well-used path cutting a diagonal line across the clearing, its hard-packed soil a welcome sign that we might be on the verge of finding an actual route out. Standing at the edge, Ryan exhaled a joyful laugh, the tension draining from his face at the promise of safety. We followed that path for some time, the conversation turning practical as we discussed hopefully seeing a ranger station or a familiar trail marker. Yet an undercurrent of something deeper remained, reminding us that the bigger unknown was how to preserve what we had discovered. My heart raced each time I recalled the softness of his lips in the tent, the warmth of his breath against my ear, the trembling way I had clung to him in that moment of shared vulnerability. As twilight began to swallow the last rays of sun, we settled at a small clearing off the path, deciding to camp one more night before hopefully emerging from the wilderness by midday tomorrow. The renewed sense of direction buoyed our moods, but it also magnified the significance of this final evening alone with each other. We quietly prepared our shelter, rummaging for the last of our edible supplies, and while the air brimmed with fatigue, an unspoken excitement lingered at the thought of what our closeness might look like tonight. Ryan and I shared a subdued meal, exchanging half-smiles that spoke more than our few scattered words. And as the forest night deepened, we found ourselves easing into the tent with a familiar swirl of nerves, grateful we no longer needed excuses to explain our desire for proximity. Even as exhaustion tugged at my limbs, I couldn't ignore the hopes surging beneath my cautious heart, believing that the trust we had nurtured, both physically and emotionally, would withstand whatever awaited us when we finally emerged into the real world once again. We woke at first light, the birds announcing morning with cheerful calls that sounded more vibrant than on any previous day, and as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, I noticed Ryan stirring on the other side of the tent, his features calm despite the rigors of our hike. Our eyes met in a moment of quiet recognition, an unspoken understanding that this was our last morning hidden away from the world, the final stretch of time before we stepped back into ordinary life, carrying a new bond that neither of us had anticipated. The relief of realizing we were close to finding an exit route mingled with a faint sadness that these secluded nights of undivided attention and raw honesty were coming to an end. I caught myself wishing we had just a little more time away from prying eyes, yet I also yearned for the safety of civilization. We packed our belongings in near silence, deliberately efficient, as if stalling might tempt us to linger, but our hearts were set on completing the journey. Outside, rays of sunlight cut through the tall pines, illuminating the path we had discovered the evening before, so we followed it with determined steps, feeling each mile slip behind us. Ryan kept close at my side, occasionally bumping my shoulder or grasping my wrist when the dirt sloped dangerously, and I found comfort in his presence and the memory of how our bodies had fit together in the tight confines of the tent. My nerves fluttered with a cautious optimism each time we traded small smiles, sharing the silent promise that the closeness we'd found didn't need to vanish the moment we reached the forest's edge. After a couple of hours, we spotted a weathered sign with red lettering, the words "Park Boundary," barely legible through years of wear, and my heart soared with gratitude. Beyond it lay a genuine trailhead leading toward a modest ranger station, exactly the sort of place we'd spent so long hoping to see. Relief surged through me as I realized we were, in fact, going to make it out unscathed, and I had to fight the urge to grab Ryan's hand and cheer. Instead, we exchanged a look filled with gratitude and lingering traces of the intimacy we hadn't yet dared to define, and we continued forward, crossing that threshold from wilderness into the more predictable realm of signs, dirt roads, and the faint hum of cars in the distance. By midday, we stood at the ranger station, a small wooden outpost where a kind-eyed staff member offered water and listened to our tale of losing the trail. She assured us that people got turned around in these parts more often than they liked to admit. Yet as she radioed to check if we needed any medical assistance, I felt Ryan's steady hand on my back, silently reminding me we were in this together. My cheeks reddened at the way he lingered, protective and near, but my chest warmed too, thrilled that he showed no impulse to retreat from our new closeness. Though we kept our voices calm, quietly explaining our detour through the forest, I sensed an unspoken tension rippling beneath every casual word, a reminder that, if asked, we could not possibly detail the truest part of our adventure. Once we had confirmed that we were healthy, albeit exhausted, we caught a lift from a passing driver who agreed to take us back to the nearest main road, where eventually a short bus ride would lead us to our dorm parking lot. The entire trip back felt surreal, the hum of the vehicle and the chatter of the driver contrasting starkly with the hush of pine-scented isolation we had shared. Ryan sat beside me, his thigh pressed lightly against mine, and though neither of us dared hold hands in front of a stranger, our shoulders occasionally brushed, and he would flash me that subtle smile, the one that said he remembered every moment of our nights alone. My mind spun with questions about how we would move forward, whether friends would notice our changed dynamic, or if we'd find ourselves stumbling over half-truths whenever asked about the trip. But whenever doubt rose, I recalled the comforting thrum of his heartbeat beneath my fingers and felt my anxiety lessen. Late that afternoon, we arrived at last in the dorm parking lot, the sun casting elongated shadows across the asphalt as we stepped off the bus. Normally, we would have split ways without fanfare, but standing side by side amid the mundane bustle of students unloading groceries, I hesitated. Ryan looked down at me, his face showing that same tangle of relief and reluctance I felt, and for a moment, We let the sounds of traffic and chatter fade, meeting each other's eyes in a silent conversation. I thought about the forest, the smell of rain on leaves, the press of his lips in the damp darkness of our tent, and I swallowed the knot in my throat as I realized those memories might remain a secret treasure for us to guard. He cleared his throat and suggested we find a quiet spot to talk before heading to our respective rooms. A soft plea that made me exhale shakily and nod. We ended up near an old bench behind our dorm building, where ivy crawled along the walls, and no one seemed to lurk. My body felt tense as I let my backpack slide off, waiting for him to speak. His hands shook a little when he took mine, explaining in a low voice that he needed me to know he wasn't pushing me away, that what happened between us was real and meant more to him than a passing spark born of desperation. Tears pricked at my eyes, and I admitted that despite the fear, I wanted to see where this connection led, no matter how complicated it might become when faced with everyday pressures. Our exchange ended not with a dramatic kiss, but with a quiet determination to be patient, to let our feelings unfold without rushing or hiding in plain sight. We parted for the day, each returning to a familiar dorm room that now felt strangely foreign because of how changed we were inside. That night, when I drifted off to sleep, it wasn't dread that filled my thoughts, but a cautious excitement about the next time we could talk. The next time we might allow ourselves another private moment to explore whatever we had begun. Though the forest was far behind us, the openness and honesty it had forced upon us remained, providing a new closeness that felt as necessary as breath. Looking ahead, I realized we might stumble over explanations to our friends, we might endure the friction of rethinking who we were to each other, but we would not face those challenges alone. The sense of being lost had yielded something deeper than fear. It revealed the possibility of a bond that transcended labels, forged by trust and lit by that flicker of desire we had finally dared to name. Even if we found our path to be rocky or uncertain, we had already proven that we could navigate the wilderness of doubt and come out standing side by side, bound by a secret that felt far too precious to deny. In that knowledge, I discovered the confidence to face life's next steps, assured that Ryan and I had taken a risk that would forever shape both our friendship and our future.